both dual cab diesel 4x4 utes. They both produce 154 kilowatts and they're both grey. But what's going to be quicker? The 2025 Kia Tasman SX or the Ford Ranger XLT? Now, Ford Australia has confirmed the Bi-Turbo will be deleted from the Ranger lineup and in fact the Everest lineup as well from around mid-2026. I've asked Ford Australia and they said you still should be able to buy it up until around mid-2026. So it's still available now, but not for much longer. It produces 154 kilowatts and 500 Newton meters from a 2-litre twin-turbo diesel 4-cylinder, while in the Kia you've got a 2.2-litre turbo diesel 4-cylinder, same 154 kilowatts, but with 440 Newton meters, so about 60 Newton meters less. The Kia uses an 8-speed automatic transmission, while the Ford has a 10-speed auto. Now, what's different about these drivelines is the Kia, even in SX form, has a 4A mode, so you can drive on dry tarmac with 4-wheel drive. The Ford, on the other hand, with the Bi-Turbo in XLT trim, only has an old school 4-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive system, so 4H, only for off-road driving. I mean, you can drive 4H on the road, but it's like locking the front and rear axles together. So you can imagine as soon as you start turning, turning the steering wheel, it's gonna, or it could load up the axles and you might break something. So for this test, I'm just gonna run them both in rear wheel drive so it's nice and consistent and even. As usual, I'll set up the tripod here on this private road for the full quarter mile, and then during the editing, I'll splice it together so that both vehicles take off at the exact same point. The tripod's in the exact same spot on the road as well, including about the 1/8 mile and the quarter mile. And the figures at the end are the best result I got out of the V-Box. So what I usually do is, during testing, do the V-Box test first. So a few different runs, try out different modes and so on, different takeoff methods. Those figures are the best result that the V-Box shows, regardless of what the kind of footage looks like. And keep in mind the footage, it's 3 runs back to back. So I'll take a shot here, then halfway, and then at the end. So some engines are probably going to, heat up a little bit. There's not that much cool down that I do. I just run back down here, up the other end, turn around, and then just line it back up and go straight away again. So it gives you a bit of an idea of longevity in terms of performance, I guess. But yeah, those figures at the end are the best result that I have achieved out of both of them. Weather is pretty similar for both the tests. It's about 23 degrees today for the Kia. I think it was about the same in the Ford, maybe slightly warmer. The only other difference is the Kia does come with a sport mode, but I've found sport modes aren't always quicker with diesel vehicles because they cause the engine to rev too much, and that's not what you really want with a diesel, not always anyway. It's about 50% of the time that I've tested down here, yeah, the sport mode has been a little bit slower than the normal mode. But in the Kia's case, I have tested the X Pro and the X Line, and they were both quicker in the sport mode. So that's what I'll select for this test. The Ford doesn't come with a sport mode, at least in the XLT Bi-Turbo trim. Let's see how they go. There we go. It might not be the best looking out of the two, but the Kia is actually quicker than the Ford, at least in this virtual drag racing scenario. Now, obviously you don't buy utes to go drag racing in. I just thought it was an interesting comparison considering they both produce the same power. But even with less torque, 60 Newton meters less torque, the Kia is able to win with a better power to weight ratio. Now in the real world, that probably doesn't apply so much, because if you load them up, put some passengers in there, put something in the cargo area or tow something, I think the Ford would be more sort of useful because it has that extra torque. Load this thing up and I think it would impact performance more than the Ford, in other words. Taking a look at some other areas in terms of economy. Now, the Ford's an interesting one. I thought they were deleting the Bi-Turbo because of emissions and consumption, but it actually is quite good on paper. Official average for the Kia is 7.6 litres per 100 kilometres, while the Ford is just 7.2 litres per 100 kilometres. Actually among the lowest in this class, in this sort of dual cab 4x4 ute class. I think it might be actually the lowest, the Ford. And then the emissions output, 200 grams per kilometre in the Kia and 189 in the Ford. So again, quite good, at least on paper. They both feature an 80 litre fuel tank. So as you can imagine, the Ford offers a slightly longer theoretical average range based on that consumption rate. 1,111 kilometres versus 1,053 kilometres in the Kia. Potential range, that is, or potential theoretical average range. So if you are doing a lot of touring and so on, I think the Ford, well, at least on paper, does seem to be the better option in terms of economy. In terms of off-roading, so I know the X Pro does very well off-road. In the test that I've done, it's shown to me that it is very capable. This example is not as, or at least it doesn't seem as good on paper. 206 millimeters of ground clearance versus 234 millimeters in the Ranger. And you can see in that front end, like, it really does stick down quite low. That does impact the approach angle as well. Just 20-degree approach angle in this spec Kia against 30 degrees in the Ford. Breakover, or the departure angle, 25 degrees in the Kia, 23 in the Ford, so slightly better in the Kia. And then the breakover angle, 23.7 degrees versus 21 in the Ford. So breakover angle and departure, the Kia is better, or it offers more clearance, but then that approach angle is way below the segment standards. It's at least 25. 27, it seems to be a pretty common number, but 30 degrees is kind of the benchmark. That's what most of them seem to aim for. So I'm going to guess the Ranger is going to be slightly better off-road. I couldn't find a rear diff lock in this SX variant. I'll flash up any specs to clarify that, but the XLT with the Bi-Turbo does come with a rear diff lock. You are paying more for the Ranger though. These are pretty even in terms of where they sit in their respective lineups. The SX is kind of a mid-level variant. XLT is kind of mid-level as well, or even lower mid-level. You've got the XL, XLS, then XLT, but then you've got Sport, Wild Track, and you can add, Platinum and Raptor and stuff on top of it. Whereas the SX, there's only the there's only the S below it, I'm pretty sure. You've got the SX Plus slightly above this. But yeah, 54,490 for the Kia and 63,890 for the Ranger. So yeah, definitely a bigger outlay to go with the Ranger. What about towing and so on? Well, they're both rated at 3.5 tons. The Kia does have a damped tailgate, which is nice, but it doesn't have a tub liner as standard. You've just got the body colored paint there to scratch up nicely. You do have these little hooks, which are slightly low mounted, at least at the back. The front ones aren't right at the top, so that is good. I prefer hooks that are mounted low down, so you can tie things down to the floor of the bed rather than against the wall. But then if you look at some of the other figures like towing, the GVM is 3,250 kilograms in the Kia versus 3,230 kilograms in the Ford, so slightly ahead in the Kia, with a gross combination mass of 6.2 tons in the Kia, 6.35 tons in the Ford. Hook up a max rated trailer, so 3.5 ton trailer. Let's start with the GVM. So GVM minus the curb weight, remembering the Ford is slightly heavier, minus 350 kilograms for the tow ball download, so 10% they say of the trailer, so 350 kilograms. You're left with 617 kilograms in the Kia and 520 kilograms in the Ford. But you have to look at the GCM as well, especially for the Kia. It actually runs into the GCM before running into the GVM. You've got a 6,200 kilogram GCM in the Kia, 6,350 kilograms in the Ford. So a GCM minus the curb weight minus 3.5 tons, you're left with 417 kilograms in the Kia and 490 kilograms in the Ford. That's about 73 kilograms difference. I know it's not much, but that could be a relatively small passenger that you can take with the Ford and not be able to take with the Kia. So, what would I take out of these two? Well, the Kia is obviously less expensive, so that is a very tempting option. I love the interior of the Kia. It's just really nice and suave and practical and huge. Like these pillars, they really stick up like a boxy Jeep or something like that. And it just gives you so much perception of space as well as actual space. It's also got the latest touchscreen and all that. Even in SX form, you've got these cloth seats, which are quite nice. They're not as sort of durable, I guess, compared with leather. And you've got plenty of storage down on the center console. Nice intricate detailing for the climate vents and kind of a mesh system that runs all the way across, even though it's not completely functional. It does blend in and just pair it all up. Then heaps of space in the back seat. It doesn't have climate vents in the back of the SX, which is pretty unfortunate, I think. It does have a full-length mat, at least in this example, and there's no flip-down armrest with cup holders. You do have bottle holders in the doors though, and more of that sort of, yeah, interesting trim. And then the Ford, I think the interior is quite nice in that as well, very practical. I think Ford did a good job when they launched the latest generation Ranger, taking in a lot of feedback, what people want, what people need. Practicality and all of that is quite good. It's just the Kia is definitely a bit more modern in terms of design inside and a little bit bigger, even the back seat. But yeah, you're missing out on rear climate vents, which I think is a pretty big downside for the Kia. Look, overall, I think I would pick the Ford. It does have excellent off-road capability. I do like the way the Ford handles. I've said this before about the previous Kia Tasman reviews. I'm just not sure about the front end of the Tasman. For me, it's just a tiny bit soft and it kind of just has that bouncing sort of cushy effect, whereas the Ford just stays really flat and solid, turning around corners and so on. There's hardly any body roll at all, but in a good way. It feels really natural to drive for a ute. But let me know what you think. What would you take out of these two? I guess, considering the price as well, you could step down to the XLS Ranger, which is probably going to be more evenly matched to this in terms of spec and what you get, and it gets a bit closer to price. But yeah, what would you take out of these two? Thanks for watching.